Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to have a bit of a tough conversation when it comes to the Tower of Adversity, when it comes to the balancing of Wuthering Waves in its endgame, and a topic in gacha games that oftentimes can make people feel not very happy. And that is going to be the shilling of end game units. Except this time, this isn't going to be a conversation about how Kuro Games is trying to sell the unit way too hard. This is going to be a conversation about how Kuro Games actually isn't doing enough to sell the newest unit. You might be surprised, you might feel like I'm crazy, but the fact of the matter is actually quite simple. Ciaccona is one of the least popular units that you can use to clear the middle towers of the hazard zone that are supposed to be specifically designed to work around her and make her feel really good to use. And maybe this is a result of the backlash that Kuro Games received for Zani's tower, where Zani received like a 100% spectral damage amplification, frazzle damage amplification, and it made her objectively the most brain-dead character possible to use in the mode. And in this most recent reset, they've dialed it back a lot. And the thing is, they might have dialed it back a little bit too much, because one thing in particular is a fact when it comes to Ciaccona in this most recent tower. I'm looking at floor number 1 over here against Crownless. We've got a buff over here that when you inflict arrow erosion damage on enemies, the active resonator gains an additional 40% critical damage. Arrow resistance is reduced. Let's see what the most popular teams are. You would expect the on-banner character is there. Let's take a look. All right. Our first one is a Carlotta, Shorekeeper, and Jeja team. Our second one is a Zani, Phoebe, and Shorekeeper team. Our third one is Zhang Liao, Yinlin, Shorekeeper. Then we got Jancy, Shorekeeper, and Jeja. Then we got Carlotta, Jeja, and Verena. Now we got Gian, Shorekeeper, and Mortifi. You can sort of see what's going on. Ciaccona, the on-banner character, shows up in the 8th spot. Ciaccona, the on-banner character, who is essentially the only one in this lineup that's able to activate that buff of 40% crit damage. She shows up in the 8th place slot. Guys, I'm gonna be honest here. This is one of potentially the worst statistics I have seen for the newest character. I've already said it multiple times. I thought that this tower was one of the most free-to-play friendly ones possible, but I do feel like there's a certain amount of just... This is baffling that there are 7 teams in front of her when it comes to actually her overall strength and popularity. And I think that that is for a couple of reasons. The first one being, I don't feel like Ciaccona as a character was released in the right spot. I don't think it particularly makes very much sense for a unit who, you know, supports an archetype, does all this stuff, is the sub DPS, to release in a state where they don't even have an ideal DPS partner to work with. And the fact of the matter is, in the current version of the game, this team over here, where it's, you know, Ciaccona and Gian, that is actually the best team that she has in the game. Gian, a character that fundamentally doesn't really have any synergy at all with arrow erosion, and Shorekeeper, another character that has no synergy at all with arrow erosion. And this is the best team that she can currently use in the existing content. I think they might have made a mistake when it comes to this unit. I think they might have messed up when it came to why exactly she is releasing in this state. And I feel like genuinely the only way to counter that and for people to actually pull her to not immediately bench her because every other team clears faster or feels better than her because she has no synergy at all with the existing units on the roster, it kind of feels like the buff should have been stronger. Not to the point where she's objectively just gonna go ahead and blast everything like Zani did, but to the point where she doesn't feel like one of like top 10 options to use. So many other teams feel better to use than hers. And if Kuro isn't necessarily going to release her best in slot DPS, her best in slot team, and it's not going to be available on her release, I do feel like this is a circumstance where the buff should have actually been stronger. If I could make a trade, I would have traded the whole buff that Zani had with like 100% spectral damage amplification. It should have been like 100% arrow erosion damage amplification. And then these buffs maybe should have probably just been different. Because right now, you can just see it. Oh, this is the one stage where it's... Okay, on this stage, she's in the top 4, right? But you can clearly see there's only one team, and it's by barely more. This is already the top 50%. This is the other stage. The top 50% are dominated by teams that don't have her. She consists of, at this point, 3.6% of the clears. That's on the second stage. And then on this stage, she consists of 2.5% of the 3-star clears. Guys, that doesn't feel like it's particularly that crazy. That doesn't particularly feel like something that the new on-banner character that's supposed to get the maximum value from these buffs. I feel like there needs to be a bit more of a balance struck when it comes to the balancing going on over here. I'm all for not overly shilling the characters. I'm also in the boat that the new characters shouldn't be way worse than the already existing ones. Especially when it comes to a tower buff that's supposed to be, at the very least, making them feel particularly powerful. Because one of the worst things or experiences you can have in a gacha game is pulling a new unit and then having the realization or having the thought that they're literally worse or lower value than the previous units you pulled. And that's a little bit rough. One thing to note, though, when it comes to these statistics is that these are only counting perfect scores on your first clears. And this might not be factoring in the whole idea that some people might have done these clears before Ciaccona went live. They might have done their clears before Ciaccona was available. But I'm going to be real here. Based off of my own personal experiences, based off of the fact that I've done clears with the Ciaccona Gion team, and I've done clears with basically every single team on here, the Ciaccona team is one of the lower performing ones. Yeah, the Ciaccona team, in comparison to pretty much every single team on here that isn't Yinlin Zhang Liao, it's not as good. But yeah, I would say as a whole, definitely something for a lot of players that currently own her to think about. I think the unit could be a little bit better. I think the unit could have released in a better spot. I think that, honestly, if Fleur-de-Lis or Cartithia was supposed to be Ciaccona's best-in-slot unit, I do feel like the DPS should have released first, and then the support that amplifies the DPS's damage should have released afterwards. Because when you have the sub-DPS unit that does the amplification coming out first, and they don't have anybody to properly amplify, they're just kind of going to suck. They're kind of just not going to be good. You can argue this problem with Changli and Cantarella. Cantarella, at the very least, is a best in slot for Jinsei, right? She has somebody to amplify. Changli, at the very least, can be like a half buffer for Zhang Liao. She has somebody to amplify. Ciaccona buffs Gion with like 1/4 of her kit. Her 24% arrow damage bonus. And then her arrow erosion just fucking absolutely nothing in the existing team comps in the game. And the end result is that, like, right now in her current state, this unit over here kind of just feels like one of the lowest value ones in the game, when it's becoming more and more clear that she's going to be a pretty solid pick for Cartithia, knowing Cartithia's synergy with arrow erosion. And I do just genuinely think it probably would have just been better to release Cartithia first, people see her damage potential, and then release the buffers kit afterwards. Because right now, all we have is the buffer and nobody to fucking buff, and this unit kind of just feels like a joke, as far as I'm concerned. Because her teams, they're not really like a high priority for anybody right now. Everyone's using Carlotta instead. Everyone's using Zani instead. That's kind of just how it is. So yeah, hopefully, I know this was like a bit of a rant. I know this was like a bit of like, you know, philosophy of the middle tower. But I'm honestly just of the opinion that right now, Ciaccona's teams don't perform well enough to, you know, just satisfy some of like the basic requirements of a character in a gacha, a limited banner character, and an endgame mode that is, you know, to some degree supposed to be tailored around her. And especially when we compare it to the Zani buff that we had in the past, where Zani was absolutely fucking ridiculous, this is a character that needed that ridiculousness a lot more. This is the unit with no DPS partner versus Zani, who had her best in slot team. This is the unit that needed a Zani level buff, if we're frankly being honest, because right now her performance as a whole just falls below pretty much every other team in the game. So yeah, let me know what you all think. Peace.